So much that you're now told about this climate crisis is false. The Prime Minister this week, hydrogen is going to be the new miracle fuel. Well, we'll see about that. Electric cars, it's going to help save us. Or worse, you had the New South Wales Environment Minister and Treasurer, Matt Keane, is more green than Labor, more sanctimonious than Labor, more full of it. Yesterday, Keane gave a speech at a Sydney Morning Herald summit claiming that the devastation of the Black Summer bushfires 2 years ago, before the rains actually returned, showed that climate change was a real threat. And he then signed a UN agreement on electric cars, while saying that 50% of new cars sold in New South Wales will be electric by 2030. Well, let's now do what no one at the Sydney Morning Herald seems to care about these days. Let's check some of these claims. Joining me again is Professor Bjørn Lomborg, author of the bestsellers False Alarm and The Skeptical Environmentalist, and president of the Copenhagen Consensus think tank. Bjørn Lomborg, thank you so much for your time. Love to catch up with you again. First, since the Black Summer fires in Australia 2 years ago, we've had so much rain that the fire rating for Victoria, for instance, is close to nil just weeks from summer starting. But this idea that the fires then show that global warming is a real threat, what do you say to that?
Again, I think, Andrew, you need to have the evidence, and you need to have the whole evidence. And what that tells us is we actually used to see much, much more fire in all of Australia. Now, remember, it was bad, the fires in 19 to 20, because they were close to where people live. So there's a real problem. But that's not global warming. That's not what you would expect from global warming. You would expect more fire everywhere. And that is not what we saw. We actually saw one of the lowest levels of fire. So in this century, we've had about 6% of the Australian surface burn every year. Before that, it used to be upwards of 8 to 10%. In 2019-20, it was just below 4%. So we need to know that, and we need to know and understand this is not the catastrophe that you're being sold on. It's a problem, and absolutely a problem for people who live close by. But that doesn't mean this is global warming, and we now should solve this problem by cutting carbon emissions dramatically. That's actually the least effective way of solving what is most probably not actually caused mostly by global warming, but by bad forest policies.
Now, you also hear the claim from Greta Thunberg, is just across the water from you, that people are now dying from global warming, and the UN opened this climate conference saying that humans face extinction. What does the science say about that?
So look, global warming will have mostly negative impacts. That's why it is a problem. But you need to have a sense of proportion. If you look at the two obvious impacts of climate, is that when temperatures rise, you're going to see more heat, and hence more heat waves, and hence more heat deaths. That's absolutely true. A new study in Lancet showed that over the last 20 years, because of rising temperatures, we've seen 116,000 more heat deaths. But what you don't hear is that when temperatures rise, you also see less cold waves, and hence fewer cold deaths. And that matters much, much more, because many more people die from cold than heat. So actually, the same Lancet study found that because of rising temperatures, you've now seen fewer people die from cold, to the order of 283,000 people. Overall, it was 166,000 fewer people dying because of heat and cold. You never hear that story. The graph that you're showing on the screen as well tells us another story, namely that all the other things we worry about, so floods, droughts, storms, wildfires, they also cause damage, but they used to cause much, much more death. They used to kill about 500,000 people on average every year. Today, or this year, they'll probably kill less than 7,000. We've seen a reduction of 99%. And again, this is not because global warming is not a problem, but it is because we as humans, because we're richer, we're better able to tackle problems, we are much, much more resilient. And leaving that conversation out, not telling people, look, we're actually much smarter. Yes, we still have a problem with global warming, but we're much smarter, doesn't give you a good understanding, and of course leaves good school kids to be scared.
Oh my goodness, Bjørn, you can't believe we've seen kids in Australia on TV crying. I mean, literally crying for fear. I mean, it's just so extraordinary. Now, these plans by our politicians to get us to drive more electric cars, we've heard our Prime Minister do it. The Treasurer in New South Wales says, oh, look, it'll be 50% electric cars by 2030. What good would that actually do in terms of cutting the emission, cutting the temperature, when the electricity these cars use, more than 2/3 of that comes from coal and a lot of the rest from gas?
Yes. So again, we have this idea that electric cars are the wonder kid of climate policy and it'll solve everything. It'll solve a tiny bit. And electric cars are fun if you can afford them and if you only drive short distances. That's great. So for some people, electric cars are going to be the future. For other people, it's not. And I think we need to recognize that we're not going to solve global warming by forcing everyone to use technology they don't want. The way we solve problems is to get them to have technology that's so cheap and so good that they want it. Just to give you a sense of proportion, an electric car, as you mentioned, doesn't mean zero emissions. It still has higher inputs because the batteries take up a lot of energy when they're being produced. And if they're charged by partly fossil fuel electricity, they will also emit quite a bit simply because they emit it when they recharge from the fossil fuel powered electricity. Overall, the International Energy Agency estimates roughly that a gasoline car will emit about 36 tons of CO2 over its lifetime, and an electric car will emit 26 tons of CO2. So it's a little better, and that means we should try to go to electric cars, but we should not be spending, as many politicians are doing, the order of $10,000 to try to get people to buy it. It's a terribly ineffective way of fixing the problem. Of course, you're not going to get Indians and everybody else to use electric cars because they're subsidized in Australia. You need to make them cheaper through innovation.
Bjørn Lomborg, it's always terrific to talk to you. I feel like getting a cold shower of facts and no spin. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thank you.